Welcome everybody again to another episode of the ideaXme show, that show that profiles the humans behind the really big ideas that are shaping the world, inspiring the future, and future creators. And for all those that like really great stories, I'm Ira Pastor, your exponential health ambassador along for this journey today. So over the 20th century, major breakthroughs in medicine, public health, social and economic development have really resulted in unparalleled extensions of human lifespan across the world. And this has been a major triumph for humanity, but obviously major challenges have arisen alongside it. Globally, we are in 2019 facing a major demographic shift. Today, close to 9% of the 7 billion plus people that populate this planet are aged 65 and older. By 2050, that percentage is estimated to more than double. Global population of octogenarians or above, that is people aged 80 or older, is expected to more than triple by the year 2050, growing to over 500 million. At this current pace, even with all the advanced tools available to us, population aging, needless to say, is poised to impose significant strains on economies, health systems, social structures worldwide. Now, obviously on this show, we've spent a lot of time on recent months highlighting various visionaries, thought leaders that are developing the new therapies, technologies, preventative and social services that can really help the way transform the way we age, ensuring better health, function, productivity during this extended period of longevity. However, when I ask the question usually on this show about sort of what are the rate limiting steps, I don't hear about regulations, I don't hear about politics, special interest groups, I hear about funding. Ultimately, in this world, which is flush with amazing amounts of wealth, ultimately, how do we make some of it available, outside of your traditional channels of life science, venture capital, private equity, and so forth, to really make sure it's appropriately channeled to support this next generation of breakthroughs in healthy longevity, so that all of us can benefit from the tremendous opportunities. Today, I'm honored to say that we are joined by Mr. George MacGinnis. He is the Challenge Director of the Healthy Aging Program at the UK Research and Innovation, or UKRI. UKRI, for all those on this side of the Atlantic, is a quasi-autonomous non-governmental organization of the UK that directs research and innovation funding, funded through the science budget of the Department of Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy. It was established in 2018, and UKRI works in partnerships with various universities and research organizations, charities, ultimately in a mission to foster research and development within the UK, and creating a positive impact, pushing the frontiers of human knowledge, delivering economic impact, and creating social and cultural impact as well. Most excitingly, recently Mr. MacGinnis was chosen to lead the 98 million pound, for conversion $125 million US research and innovation program supporting the UK government Aging Society Grand Challenge in order to ensure that people can enjoy at least 5 extra healthy, independent years of life by the year 2035, all while narrowing the gap between experience of the richest and the poorest in society. Mr. MacGinnis has a varied background in healthcare and care innovation, including recent work on the capacity needs for the health and social care system in Ireland, review of the NHS Small Business Research Innovation Initiative in healthcare, review of the medtech sector for academic health science networks, and the lead user group for the Global Industry Alliance to enable a consumer-friendly market for digital wellness and health products. Mr. MacGinnis holds master's degrees from both Cambridge and King's College London, as well as an MBA. Mr. MacGinnis, thank you for taking the time to come on the show today and talk about what you're doing.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a real honor. Can you take just a little time, just, as we start off, really, we'd love to give you the floor just to introduce yourself. I know you started off in sort of the areas of engineering, defense, international affairs, but ultimately sort of your background in those areas and ultimately how you transition into really what is the forefront of one of the most pressing issues that we have facing us in society nowadays, and that is this, what many term the sort of the silver tsunami that's coming.
Yeah, and we'll come back on to the opportunities of aging populations later. But
Sure.
As you said, actually it was nearly 40 years ago I read engineering. Actually found my way into the military for nearly 20 years, and then entered into the management consulting world. And I sort of entered healthcare almost by accident, being asked to go and do something around digital health with a team working there. And then very quickly after that, I was seconded into the UK's National Programme for IT for Healthcare. From there, I was asked to sort of set up and deliver an innovation program around the technologies for supporting people to remain at home, supporting people to look after their chronic conditions remotely. I did that for a number of years, and after that, I started realizing that actually it was less about the technology, and you really had to get involved in health service reform and understand all the changes that are going on. The technology was, if you like, an enabler, but unless you were part of that broader piece. And so in more recent years, I've worked both in terms of strategy at a system level, hence the piece in Ireland, so looking at what their system might look like in the future, certainly, and what they would need if they did nothing in particular in reform. The two scenarios are quite starkly contrasting, but also actually getting much more involved in the front line, understanding what it takes to change in healthcare systems, understanding patient flow and performance and things like that. And I've done that. I've been really lucky. I've done that in a number of international contexts. So I've worked for a health system in the US, introducing some digital health and connected sort of technologies to transform some of their services, thinking particularly about out of hospital, but actually not just out of hospital, thinking about actually how actually maybe you can retain the experience of staff who no longer want to work on a ward in a coaching role to support the young people coming through. So various things like that. I've worked in the Middle East. Really interesting to see, when it almost, if you like, money is no object, it still doesn't necessarily give you great healthcare. So what is that? As you've alluded to, working increasingly with companies who are trying to innovate in this space and helping them understand and navigate that, and to help systems understand what's the value that they're getting from early stage innovations coming through. So it feels like a bit of an accident of history, but actually it's an area that affects us all. So that's one reason why a lot of people are attracted into healthcare and the aging. There's a lot of really, really interesting innovation, and there's a long way to go. So real opportunities for people to come in and make an impact. So hence the accident of history via the military.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. For those of the folks that are listening and watching here in the U.S., could you just talk a little bit about UKRI? Because I'm trying to see if there was a proxy over here in the U.S., because it seems like you've really brought together some very unique capabilities from various research councils in the UK beyond sort of health, science and tech. I mean, it mentions arts and the humanities, the environment, education, things like this. Just talk a little bit about how it's created, what it does sort of as a group, how it's funded, just so we get a little more clarity on sort of the structure of it.
So it's a marriage of 9 different organizations that have been established and around for a long time, exactly as you said. So Medical Research Council, Arts and Humanities, bits and pieces. Most of those were university facing. Some of them were the funding organizations for big national infrastructure around computing and innovation and manufacturing development. And one of them was our innovation agency, which was focusing focused on business. And bringing them together actually means that they work together. And I'm new to the organization. I joined in January. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I find really interesting is actually the dynamic actually of people who weren't used to working together actually bringing their different perspectives on a problem. So I think as an organization it really works in terms of bringing people together. In my area, my team is principally made up of social scientists, mm-hmm. And people who've been business facing. But actually we are drawing right across the organization, working with the medical research people, working with arts and humanities. May not sound obvious, but I think design is a really important aspect of what we're doing in this. And so design is there. And actually some of the aging piece takes you into contact with the deep science biologists. So the people looking at cellular science and the science of aging. So as an organisation, UK Research and Innovation, I feel is exciting. It really works. And it's also been supercharged with funding through our new industrial strategy. So that actually is part of the mechanism for driving people together and getting better collaboration. So we've actually got some real new work to focus on.
Could you now segue into Aging Society Grand Challenge? Could you obviously a major basket of funding, 98 million pounds sterling, 125 million US dollars. Can you just talk about the model, sort of how it works in terms, are these prizes, grants, a combination of both? Who funds this? Is this purely public money? Is it public-private? And then sort of the nature of the different types of investments that you're going to be looking at. Is this purely biotech? Is it more sort of the built environment services? Sort of the ecosystem of what it will be looking at. And then ultimately, the last part of that, sorry, multiple parts of the same question, what does the review sort of group look like? Obviously you mentioned scientists, but there's a lot more that goes into this than just the basic science on the sort of biotech side. Talk a little bit about that, if you would, too.
Well, actually, if I start by taking a step back and how all this sort of came about. So,
please.
It was about 3 years ago that the government published its industrial strategy. So clearly, we're going through a period of transition, one way or the other. Clearly, innovation is going to be really important to any modern economy. And the industrial strategy recognised that actually we probably needed to invest more in research and development and focus on areas that were globally significant. And it set out four grand challenges actually, it set out, which actually reflect the really big issues in society today. So climate change, some AI and computing, and the aging society. And so when you look at the four challenges, there is one about AI and data, there's one about clean energy, there's one about the future of mobility. Those two are very much around the green agenda. And then, as you say, the aging society grand challenge. And it's important to sort of talk about that as an aging society. And I'll then come back to how healthy aging actually fits in that.
Sure.
And you already sort of highlighted that the Aging Society Grand Challenge has a mission, and it's a really, really ambitious mission. It's essentially a moonshot to see where we can get to, and that's to say that if you take the context that in the 1950s there was very little difference between life expectancy and the ages at which people finished working. So fast forward 70 odd years, and now on average men can expect to live around 15 years and women can expect to live around 20 years after they stop working. And actually the good news is quite a lot of those years are in reasonable health. We don't actually need to take to the rocking chair and do nothing more from there onward. But there is a rub, and that's that our extra years are not all lived actually in good health. And in fact, there are growing disparities. There are disparities between those who have prospered in their early years and those who've built up, if you like, a lifetime of disadvantages. And this difference is also reflected in disparities between the prospects of men and women. So typically, women enter later life with fewer financial resources, often haven't taken on caring responsibilities, so have not had the broader network connections and the opportunities that men have. Stereotypically, and maybe that will change over time, but those disparities between more affluent areas and less affluent areas between men and women are very stark. And if we are going to deliver on a mission of delivering 5 extra years of healthy, independent living by 2035, we're going to find most of the opportunities will be in looking at some of those differentials. So having said there were, if you like, a number of global challenges and a number of moonshots, the government also set up at the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, and that's about investing nearly £2 billion UK pounds.
Okay.
So that comes up to nearly 2.5 billion US dollars in research and innovation over the next few years, as part of supercharging the move to increase our commitment to R&D. And I'll come back to actually how the funding works and what else is available to that.
Excellent.
Under the Aging Society, we have a number of investments, a lot of them around deeper medical sort of research and innovation, but specifically the bit that I look after, the sort of 98 million UK pounds, as you've said, 125 odd million US dollars for healthy aging. And what we're trying to do is enable businesses, and that includes social enterprises, to develop and deliver services and products, and the order in which I said that is relevant, and the novel business models to enable them to be adopted at scale, to support people as they age. And our hope is that this will allow people to remain active, productive, independent, and socially connected across the generations for as long as possible.
Excellent.
I should probably say something about that aim, just to re-emphasize. So the emphasis of the investment is on businesses, including social enterprises, but we recognize that science has a huge role to play in helping businesses get those innovations right.
Sure.
There's an ambition for scale. So we're doing something that's slightly different from a lot of previous investments. And the phrase that I used, people as they age. So it's not primarily focused on what we really think of as the old. But we're aiming to support people before they become dependent on health and care services, and particularly the populations that would otherwise be reaching that stage in 15 years' time. So this is an opportunity to focus on prevention and intervene earlier in that aging journey. And most previous initiatives have focused on frailty and the management of chronic conditions.
Okay.
There's still a lot going on in that across the UK and actually internationally. So that's really been the focus of, in the US and elsewhere, concepts of accountable care. I'm saying that's good, but actually we need something more, and we need something more empowering of people as they age to, if you like, exactly that, to prevent them needing some of those other services.
Sure.
And that means that what we're doing is not really about clinical research or gathering the sort of economic evidence to support changes to healthcare reimbursement, but enabling a market that people can access. So that's the broad context. And you asked some questions about what specifically are we doing and how we'll do that. And I'll say here that there are a number of challenges that are funded under the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. You'll tell from the other 1.9 billion UK pounds that there's a lot going on.
Absolutely.
Each one of those is slightly different, and I think healthy aging is subtly different from most of the rest. Most of the rest are focused on specific industries being developed, whether that's quantum computing or the future of electric vehicles and battery storage and all the rest of it.
Right.
We cover quite a broad domain, so our approach is to sort of take much more of a portfolio approach in what we're doing. And when I looked at this, and part of arriving this year, I was given an opportunity to completely review the strategy and redefine what we're doing. So we took a long, hard look at lessons from the past, at actually what were the opportunities to attract private investment into this area. So at what point can government step back? And also just took soundings from industry. What were people really wanting to do? And our original plan was to do some very, very large ecosystems that would sort of do everything in some form of microcosm. And we've taken a view that actually what we need is more bets within the portfolio. It's a really complex domain. We know the sorts of things that we need to impact, but we don't know exactly which is going to make the biggest impression overall. And if I just took a step back and talked about that scope question, so we're covering everything from supporting people to remain active in later life, through to thinking about what's the role of the environment around us in enabling us to be active. So how do our homes enable or disable us? How does the way that we set out communities enable or disable people from taking an active part? So does it isolate people in their homes, or are they able to get out to the shops? And actually, is there an alignment actually with some of these other challenges? I was at an interesting intergovernmental thing over the weekend where they were talking about all the drivers of health, healthy living, activity, reduced alcohol intake, etc. Driving cessation was one of those ones that came up as another important challenge. So you see instantly, we're talking right across all sorts of those huge societal issues. Absolutely. Through to the very real things around health and care. So how do we help people with cognitive impairment to take a full part or a better part in life? And how do we manage common complaints of aging? Now, that's an interesting term, and I use it advisedly because I'm talking less about heart failure, lung disease and things like that. And I'm talking more about how do people cope with visual sight loss and macular degeneration, with hearing impairment, even sort of difficult to talk to issues about pain and continence and things like that. Things that actually, if people are scared about, it isolates them back in their home and prevents them from taking a full part in life. And actually, one of the things that we're really interested in is work in later life. Now, health is one of the major reasons why people fall out of work in their 40s and 50s. But how can actually employers take a better role in actually creating opportunities to make better use of older people? Mm-hmm. And I was just looking, someone I'm working with from the big HR consulting firm Mercer, they've just published some work saying that actually mixed age teams are more productive than single age teams. So this idea that actually all your innovation needs to come from millennials is a myth that's being bust. Actually, connecting across the generations has value not just for the old, but for the young as well. Absolutely. And for organizations. So we're dealing with a big scope, and we want to make an impact in those sorts of areas. And I talked about a portfolio. Mm-hmm. Now, again, the incoming assumption when I arrived was that the UK, actually internationally, EU, the US has invested a lot in innovations, early stage innovations, with small and medium-sized enterprises, helping them to get there. But somehow they've never really grown or got a market. And a view was that services were really important. And if I give you a good example of that, sure. There's lots of work by technology firms on smart home technology. Mm-hmm. And indeed, if you go to major stores nowadays, the likes of Best Buy in the US, or a store in the UK like John Lewis, or a department store, you'll go in there now in their electronics department, you'll find an amazing array of stuff. Sure. Most of it is pointing towards millennials who want to do things like turn the oven on their way back from work or whatever. So we need to think through actually not just what can the technology do, because the capability's there, but how do old people access these sorts of technologies when they don't want to spend hours configuring new IP addresses? They probably don't even know how to or want to know how to. And what happens when these sorts of technologies highlight an issue? Who gets to know? How do you get to respond? And I think that's the service wrapper. So if we've got tech firms making new cell phones that are then put into the market by the mobile telcos, what's the equivalent with smart home? And that is replicated right across a series of opportunities. And when we look at the way that we innovate, we find again that young people are at the heart of things. I was at a very interesting industry event with the fitness industry, mm-hmm. where they were giving their annual tech awards. And it was also thinking about the athlete, the aspirant athlete and things like that. And all the conversation, all the questions straight after the awards were all about older people. I wasn't triggering them. I was just listening. But I was absolutely amazed that that's what people were saying. And it occurred to me that we need to connect the innovators with older people to really understand their market. And this is where design comes in, inclusive design. We really need to encourage people to understand that there is a market out there. And that actually is one of the great conundrums. So if you read the background papers on it, your figures on the numbers of people who are going to be old, you said earlier, are staggering.
Right.
But if you look at the percentage of wealth held by people over 50, it's like 3/4 in the UK of total wealth. Some of that's tied up in housing, but even sort of liquid financial wealth, there's an enormous amount there. It's like a market opportunity that no one's marketing at. And yes, in the States, you've got the AARP who've been sort of fighting this corner for a long, long time. We've got similar but not exactly the same sort of initiatives. But if you go to the big, fast-moving consumer goods companies, apart from a few minority products, they will often say their range of marketing personas finishes at around 40. Likewise in advertising companies and all the rest of it. So there's an attitudinal thing that we're trying to tackle as well.
Absolutely.
Right, so how does that get you back onto track for what are we actually going to do? So I've just painted a complex problem and a range of needs. Actually, what really came out when we talked to investors is you can't just focus on that scale question and try and educate people on the move to scale. We need to continue to invest right across a pipeline from early stage to the move up to scale. So what we're going to do does that. And we need to invest in a series of different themes and dimensions with industries that are very diverse. So I'm expecting everything from major utilities through to care providers, through to sports and fitness people, all being involved in what we're doing, with an underlay of tech clearly as one of the key components of that. Mm-hmm. So we're going to do 3 principal investments and then some other things. So I'll go and talk them. So our 3 activities, so about half the money is going to go into what we're calling trailblazers. And these are opportunities to move services to scale. Mm-hmm. And we're looking for a limited number of sites. The competitions, by the time this is broadcast, will have just closed. I know we're seeing before it's closed a fabulous level of interest in what we're doing. And we're hoping to take those forward, projects that will last up to 4 years, to really push technology that's probably matured, but business ideas that probably aren't. And I would anticipate that those sorts of initiatives will include developing new supply chains, may well involve developing and improving new business models, particularly around outcomes-based financing and things like that. And that's the move to scale. In the middle then, we are partnering with private investors, so private equity and banks and institutional investors, to set up an investment accelerator, as we would call it. Okay. And in this, we put a 50% stake down up front and are looking for the other 50% from private equity to then offer a complete funding solution to innovators who are coming looking for funding. So traditionally, we've done it in 2 halves. We've found that in the past, where there is a complete solution offered, actually you get the best of 2 perspectives. So UK research and innovation and its components have generally been really, really good at looking at a project and saying, that's a really good project. It's got a really good plan. It's got the right people to deliver it. They've got the right sort of consortium and academic involvement in it. Looking at the project, investors have been much better at looking at a business with a longer term perspective and saying, that's a team that can lead. It's a business that can grow. And so as well as our sort of 50-50 upfront funding, we're expecting the investors to find another 3 times their early stake in commitment to downstream investment. And we've launched our competition. We've got a live competition now for our first wave of investors. We've put 12 million on the table, and in future years we've got another sort of 15 million that we're going to put into that. And so that will total about 60 million as a fund up front, with an expectation that there would be nearly 90 million additional funding coming from the investors for the successful businesses within the portfolio. And I see that as a really important first stage of convincing the investment community that this is an investable area,
Sure.
that they can come in. And then the last bit of major investment is we're going to invest in a very significant program of social, behavioral, and design research, because we need to understand, and we need to share that understanding with businesses about how do people as they age actually want access services, what are the times that they buy them, how, what are the right channels there, what are the right considerations to bring in terms of the design and inclusive design and things like that. So a whole series of questions.
Sure.
In fact, those questions are at quite an early stage. So I'm only now in the process of bringing in a senior academic research director, and then we'll work with that research director to deliver that. And we're then going to wrap around a few other bits and pieces that are about maximizing the value right across that. So instead of a series of separate activities, when we get an interesting phenomenon arising, if you like, and I'll move to scale, can we direct the research into there? And likewise, in the move to scale, if they find that there's an opportunity for making an impact with some additional capability, is that coming through our early pipeline development work? So trying to make that a much more sort of comprehensive and holistic program as it goes. Apart from the research, all the way along, we are looking for co-investment. So it's about de-risking those investments. So the large-scale projects, we're expecting businesses, again, to match roughly 50-50 with what we're putting in. We believe that's a higher proportion than typically some of the other early-stage government innovations have done. But we think this is nearer to market, and we're looking for people who are really trying to go in there and sort of tip them over the edge, if you like, of the decision to actually invest and move on in. And I think skin in the game here is actually really important in terms of commitment.
Absolutely.
So that's sort of broadly sort of where our program is going. And I suppose I'll just close off, because the one thing I haven't said is I've really painted the picture. This is largely about businesses and largely about things that people will buy or use. And in that sense, in the sort of nature and nurture view of things that impact on aging, I'm leaving the nature piece as a much longer term investment to elsewhere in the organization. And this is much more about the nurture. So there is exciting work on cell science and anti-aging drugs and all the rest of it. But actually, they're not going to have, I think, a really huge population level impact by 2035. So it's down to my investment to see if we can actually impact the lives of millions of people within a decade.
Absolutely. I appreciate that comprehensive overview. I appreciate the way you look at the entire ecosystem, the concept that this isn't just a one-time investment, but you are sort of thinking about the different phases of how this, as you say, scales, and then ultimately, this demographic number, which I had the opportunity to do a show on. It was actually a magazine here in the U.S. that's focusing on this 50 plus. And the sheer number of the disposable income just sitting there is staggering. And we don't really think about it, as you were saying, all this focus on the millennials, but there is just an enormous potential there to pull this all in the direction. And it's fascinating. And I commend you on thinking through all these pieces. One thing that you mentioned, I just wanted to dive into that real fast. You talked a little about sort of the internationalization component. You had recently you had the opportunity to give sort of one of the keynotes. It was online to the launch event that occurred here in Washington, D.C. For the National Academy of Medicine's Healthy Longevity Challenge. little smaller than what you're doing, I think 30 million or so, but nonetheless, it's sort of similar. Can you just talk about sort of, as you were talking about the internationalization, sort of what you're seeing on the global scale? You know, are these programs, you know, do they have the same focus? Do you see some integration between what's going on sort of the UK challenges with the US challenges and beyond? What are you seeing sort of as sort of your future visions on how a lot of these challenges may ultimately tie together in some context?
Yeah, so I mean, interesting. So what you mentioned was one of our very early stage investments. So the work with NAM is about finding the brightest and most innovative ideas coming out of academia and supporting their development into commercializable proposals or brand new avenues for research that would probably be deemed at this stage too risky for an institution to want to take forward on their own. Actually joining that as a global collaborator with the NAM, and again, they use the same words, so it's going to get confusing because there's lots of grand challenges, but their healthy longevity grand challenge was the first major decision I actually made on taking up. And I made it because we see this as a global issue and a global opportunity. And there are opportunities not just in the sense that there are markets to sell to, but I think there's huge opportunity to learn from what's going on elsewhere around the world. And so that's why I was excited by that. We are still working on putting the finishing touches on how we supercharge the international dimension for what we expect the award winners to have to do. Clearly, some of that is facilitated already through the structures of that the National Academy of Medicine are putting in place for that challenge. But I want to make sure that we use that to make the very best of the opportunity. And it's probably worth sort of saying that a lot of our work is focused initially on the UK, but it fits within a broader portfolio. So there are other investments elsewhere that we are funding, and that it's our job to try and bring in as part of a broader community, funds for international collaboration and things like that are pushing things forward. So, for instance, we've been working up proposals more generally as an organisation, so not necessarily specifically me, to take forward a sort of prime ministerial commitment with Japan to work on AI and robotics for aging. Certainly robotics for care, that there are some things that are near to market, but actually there are some things that I still think are back in the university lab at a very early stage. And so they are best in our organisation taken forward through some of the partner councils rather than the work that I'm doing directly with businesses. But if businesses came with something that they thought was sufficiently mature in that space, we would certainly consider funding it. And would want to take that forward. And so international important dimension of that. We will continue to sort of engage internationally. We engage with missions coming into the UK, looking for partnerships. In fact, I was with a country that will remain unnamed, but actually working with another country that's doing some fabulous research and innovation in the aging space, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn from each other, to exchange both at an academic level, but also to help businesses on both sides of that and on all sides of that to grow. So at the end of the day, every developed economy is facing this, and in fact every emerging economy is facing it in a very different sort of way, with populations that may age in a different sense, but they're aging nevertheless, but without necessarily some of the infrastructure that developed economies have built up over the years. So I think real opportunities to make the most of the international work.
It's completely eye-opening, the sort of the scope of what you have ahead of you. But you clearly have laid out a plan, and you've put together so it's like an amazing team, an amazing ecosystem, amazing set of networks to get this all done. And I just really, once again, I take my hat off to you. As we say on the show, it's all about the big challenges and moving the human story forward, and just really thanking you for what you do and what you're doing. And once again, for everybody that's going to be watching and listening on the various networks, we've been spending time with Mr. George MacGinnis at UKRI, who's leading the UK government's Aging Society Grand Challenge to assure that people can enjoy 5 extra years of healthy, independent life by the year 2035. Major initiative, major problem, but clearly at the forefront with great ideas and making it happen. So George, really thank you for taking the time to talk about what you're doing, and especially educating everyone on this side of the Atlantic to these programs. It's completely fascinating.
Ira, if I could just have one last word, and that's to thank you, because this is a big societal challenge, and getting the message out and making people aware is a really important part of that. So thank you very much for your time in this interview. So and all the best to all those who are listening.